Hi everybody, I hope you're doing well. Well, this has been a good week. You all have done good work. I really enjoyed reading through some of the claims that you all have made in that first round of papers that you've sent to me. I have not had an opportunity to look at all of the work that has been turned in for this last work day of the week. I was waiting to get everybody's together and then I'm going to do it all in one batch. So I should be able to do that by Monday sometime. And so I knew that was going to take me a few days to do that. And so our focus for this next week is going to be on other sections of your final research paper. And that's the topic of my conversation with you today. We're going to be talking about writing a qualitative research report. And what I'm going to do is walk you through each of the sections of the paper. And what I'd like you to do is look at the PowerPoint slides, look at chapter number 9 of your textbook that talks about writing a research report. And as you have any questions at all, please feel free to message me. All right, so what are the goals of a qualitative research report? The goals of a qualitative research report, number one, are to contribute to an academic conversation about a particular topic. So in this case, we're looking at communication and bullying. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Dr. Beck, I'm not going to be doing anything with this. I don't want to submit it to a conference. I don't care. I'm doing this for our class. True. I'll acknowledge that most of you won't want to do anything else with your research papers. However, for the purpose of the class, I need for you to write it like you are going to be doing something with it. And you know what? After you write it, anyone in your group will have the opportunity to, if you want to, submit it to an undergraduate research conference. The Central States Communication Association Conference will be in Cincinnati in the spring of 2021, and that's just a short drive over and you could present your research. And so I want you to, as much as possible, write it with that goal in mind, okay? With submitting it if you wanted to do that. And if you wanted to do that, what you would need to really do first and foremost is really think about how this work that you're doing is contributing to that ongoing conversation about what we already know about communication and bullying, your piece of research, and then building on what's next. And indeed, that's a second goal, articulating what is next. You know, what you've done this research, what else needs to be done? What else do we need to know? And then a third goal that is really important is that you need to be giving voice to your participants. Obviously, they're not going to be present physically when somebody else is reading your work. So it's up to you to give voice to what they shared with you, what they confided to your groups, through using quotations, through trying to be as authentic as possible, making sure we're not taking anything out of context. And so you're definitely being a megaphone for their perspectives as you articulate this paper, and the paper needs to honor your participants. So those are your goals of your research report. I provided you with a couple of resources on the Blackboard site. One of the documents I provided for you, and both of these two documents are uploaded under the Information tab on Blackboard. The first one is Writing Guidelines, and the second one is the Final Paper Checklist. Both of those documents are available for you to use. There's some redundancy in the two documents, but there's also new information on both documents. So look at both of them. I phrase things in kind of different ways in both. That way, hopefully they make sense to you, and I'm able to communicate the message as appropriately as I possibly can. And then, of course, a third resource is the APA 7th edition. All of the things that you turn in for this class need to be in APA 7th edition, and especially this paper. As you look at the reference section, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I need those citations to be in APA 7th edition. As you think about citing in text, APA 7th edition. Notably, the APA 7th edition does give you some latitude with regard to the type of typeset or font that you're going to be using. I'm, as an instructor, saying I want you to use Times New Roman, and I actually have that multiple times in the PowerPoint slides. So Times New Roman 12-point font, and then following APA 7th edition. So those are some resources for you. But the PowerPoint slides, I think if you really look at the PowerPoint slides I'm uploading with this lecture, that'll be really useful to you. At least I hope it will be. All right, some suggestions as you get started. This paper is going to be about 25 pages long, and one of the groups actually emailed me last week and said, how long is it going to be? And I shared, but I was very quick to say, don't stress about that. And indeed, don't. I've broken the paper down into multiple sections so that you can see that it's really not a daunting task. And if your group decides to have different people taking the lead on different sections, it can seem less overwhelming. You're working as a team, and your team needs to work together. And the last 2 weeks of this class are really so important for working together. Everybody needs to do their part, every single person. We don't all have all of the same gifts, and that's why it's great that you're bringing those together. So everybody needs to chip in and do what they can on the paper and contribute their part as the group decides. One of the suggestions that I provided for you in the PowerPoint slides is that some groups in the past, and I've done this class a number of times, some groups in the past have found it useful to assign one person who really doesn't take the lead on any of the sections, that instead that person's job is to, at the end, go through the entire paper and make sure that the entire paper reads as with one voice. So it's not like obvious that one person took the lead on one section or one person took the lead on the other section, because it has to read consistently throughout. The language choice, the tense, everything needs to read consistently. And so if you've got somebody who maybe has an eye for that kind of detail, that might be useful to you. But with that said, that doesn't mean that said editor person then becomes your not only team captainish person, but the sole author of it. That's not what I'm saying at all, by any stretch of the imagination. If you do decide to go with an editor approach where somebody's going to look through and put it all together, that's fine. That's 100% fine. However, if that person then says, look, there's not enough of this particular piece in this section, and writes back to somebody, the person who has taken the lead on that particular section needs to be very dutiful in responding, providing the additional information, and helping, so that it's not that editor's position to go back and do massive rewrites. That's not that person's job. So anyway, that's something that is for you to consider. You don't need to do it that way. Some groups, especially with Google Docs, are able to collaborate and co-author, and it's just very collaborative the whole way through. Other groups don't work that way. So your group can do what works for you, as long as A, every single person contributes equally, and B, everybody's in agreement about how you're moving forward. There's that. All right, so let's get to the paper. There are 6 main sections of the paper: the introduction, the rationale, the methods, the findings, the discussion/conclusion, I'll give you a little bit more on that in a minute, and the reference section. Let me go ahead and start with the introduction. Now, the introduction doesn't have to be labeled introduction. You don't have to have a heading that says introduction. But this is where you're leading off and you're getting interest. Now, I imagine most of you have taken public speaking. And in public speaking, we're taught that if you don't get the audience's attention in the first 15 to 30 seconds, you're not going to get it. That's the same way with a manuscript. You need to develop a section that is going to encourage the reader to really want to read your manuscript. This is where you're leading in. Now, some people find it really beneficial to start with a quotation, maybe even a quotation from your data, right? Other papers start with a story, but you should definitely try to find a captivating way of introducing us to your topic, so you bring us into the topic, right? And as you do this, I really encourage you to end that section with a preview of your paper. So saying, okay, so in the coming sections, we'll be discussing the methods, presenting our findings, and offering some conclusions, all right? So you need a preview there, just like you need a preview for a speech. That section should be no more than 2 pages. And I kind of say this for each of the sections on the PowerPoint slides, but it should be double-spaced, Times New Roman, 12-point font. No more than 2 pages, all right? So that's where you get your 1 to 2 pages. You're introducing that topic in a compelling manner. Saying why bullying matters. Why is it important for us to study bullying research, right? In a very introductory way, because you're going to get to the rationale in the next section. But here you're just giving us a taste to try to get us really drawn in to the uniqueness of your particular project. All right, so the rationale section. Now you can certainly label this section something different than rationale. For example, I'm trying to remember in the celebrity health narrative study, I think that I might have labeled it like something like fandoms, celebrities, and health discourse or something like that. You can certainly make it more creative if you want, or you can just use the label rationale. But here is the section where you're creating a really compelling rationale for why this topic is important. Now, we might say, all right, well, bullying research is important. It's important because this is a really serious societal problem. True. We might say communication is really important because really bullying is inherently communicative. True. And then you go into your particular topic of bullying, and each of the different teams is taking a different focus. Some of you are taking pop culture, some of you are looking at family and friends, and some of you are looking at school programs. Each of those rationales would look very different from each other. Building a rationale for why we ought to conduct a study about family and friends is going to be markedly different than one that focuses on pop culture versus school programs. So focus it on the topic of your particular paper. Go much deeper than just bullying and communication. And the good news here is, this is where you draw in literature that you have already found. Your team has already gone to the work of finding many sources. When I asked you way back in week, I think 3 or 4, to do that initial bibliography, go back to those sources. Go back to them. Draw from them. How can you talk about what work has already been done in light of those sources? All right? That's what I want you to do. Now, if you have 4 people in your group, I ask everybody to get 5 sources. That's 20 sources. If you have a group of 5 people, you have 25 sources, right? I'm trying to remember how many sources I asked you. At least that. I think maybe even more now that I'm thinking about it. But all of you have these sources that you have from your papers that you have already done. Go back to them, okay? So you're situating this problem in the rationale about why our research questions matter, why they build on what's been done in the literature, and about how they're going to move this investigation forward. That's what you ought to be doing, okay? Now, in addition, you need to be thinking about how communication plays into this. What are some communication theories or issues or concepts that are really relevant here? Okay, so for example, with the Celebrity Health Narrative Project, one of the theories that was really relevant to that project was communication privacy management theory. Okay, certainly with your studies, if you're doing on school, on the school programs, persuasion might well be one, right? Looking at different issues and topics. And for this, I want you as a group to go back to your other communication classes. What are some things that you learned about interpersonal communication? What are some things you learned about if you did take a persuasion class, or you took a small group class, or you took a rhetorical theory class, or you took any number of different types of classes where you've learned about different communication concepts that could be relevant for how we understand communication and bullying. And talk about those as a team and decide which ones you want to invoke here, and then draw in those theories. Now, I'm not asking you to do any additional research other than what you've already done, except if you decide, when you decide to invoke a particular communication term or theory, you need to have a source to go along with it. Now, hopefully, if you've already taken classes and you're remembering a theory from, say, an interpersonal class or a persuasion class, you can go back to those notes and say, all right, this is where I got this term, right? Or a quick search would enable you to do that. If you have a communication concept or theory or issue or something like that that you're looking at and you're like, well, I know I want to talk about this, but I can't find the source. Message me and I'll help you with that, all right? But you're trying to ground this not just in the bullying literature, but also in the communication literature. And that's what you're to do in the rationale. Now, a very good rationale would be one in which you talk about what's been done, and then you lead up to your particular research questions, and you say, you know what? As we've looked at all of these other things, there are some questions that remain. And here are the two questions or three questions we're exploring in this study. And this is really going to advance our understanding of communication and bullying, because they haven't been talked about in the past. And it's necessary for us to understand this. That would be an ideal rationale section. Okay, so in the rationale section, I'm asking you to talk about why the study is important, how it fits with communication literature, how it fits with bullying literature. This section should be 2 to 4 pages long. Again, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced. You're creating that strong rationale. And also in this section, you want to make sure you're defining all key terms. Okay? Define all key terms. So that's the rationale section. So thus far I talked about the introduction, where you're just kind of giving us a taste of the topic. Then you move into the rationale section, where you're really talking about why it's important you're doing this research, why the questions you are asking are particularly important. And then we're going to go into the third section, which is the methods section. And here's where you tell how you did your study. Now, we've been talking about methods a lot the whole semester, right? In this methods section, I want you to talk about your methods of data collection and your methods of data analysis. In fact, those would likely be 2 subsections in this one section. Now, in the methods of data collection, a lot of it we've already been talking about, right? We as a class have talked about IRB. We got approval for our IRB based on our particular research questions. And so you should certainly include those questions that are available on the Blackboard site as an appendix, and I'll talk about that more a little later in the paper. But you're going to be talking about your sample, how you got your sample. And remember, we actually used our research pool, right? And so they did a random sample of students who were all going to be part of the research pool, and these individuals, we got assigned them, and then we reached out to them, and all of those who were randomly assigned to our study, we invited them to participate. Now, one of the pieces we don't have yet, that I'm going to have this weekend, and I'll have this uploaded on Blackboard by Monday morning, is the description of our sample. I'm going to go through the different questionnaires and count up how many total participants we had, their demographic composition, and I'll go ahead and do that work and have that uploaded to Blackboard so that you're able to talk about your sample in your data collection section. Once you've described that, then you move into methods of data analysis. And here's where you describe the process you went through just last week. Last week, you already did this thematic analysis. Talk through those steps. What did you do? What did your group do? You can say every member of the group read through the transcript 3 times, and every member of the group did initial note-taking. And then as a group, we got together and we talked about possible categories. And then hopefully, I haven't read this part of your work yet, but hopefully you collapse some of those categories into a couple of themes that will help you answer your research questions. Describe that in your methods of data analysis. And remember last week I also cautioned you to make sure that you're talking about reflexivity, about how just because you might obviously see Rudolph as an instance of bullying and that Santa definitely wasn't nice, and that you might have been surprised if one of your participants didn't see that too, you're going to bracket that, right? Because that's your perspective, that's not your participants, and your job, part of your job is to give voice to your participants. So that's an example of reflexivity, where you're really thinking about, it's not my story to tell, it's my participant's story to tell. And you're going to talk about how your group actively engaged in reflexivity right there in that data analysis section. So methods section, 2 subcategories: methods of data collection, methods of data analysis. And think about this section as writing a recipe, all right? So if I were going to be telling my daughters how to make my world famous Christie cookies, which are my world famous chocolate chip cookies, I wouldn't just say, well, you just grab some chocolate chips and you toss them in with some flour, and yeah, I use brown sugar and butter Crisco, and kind of mix it up and then kind of toss them in the oven, and there you go. That wouldn't turn out so well, right? I need to give specific instructions, including, down to the temperature and down to how I cut them. And the more specific I am, the better the chances that my daughters will be able to replicate my chocolate chip cookie recipe. Same thing with this. You need to be as specific as possible so that if somebody wanted to replicate this study, they'd have the instructions to do so. So that's what you need to do with the methods section. This section should be 2 to 4 pages long.